If I need a political opinion, if I need to know what's going on in current events, if I want a skewed opinion on something, I go to Mark for it all. And it's not a bad thing. It's one of those.
He's like walking Wikipedia.
Yeah, you keep the. Yeah, you're like the trivia guy. Everyone has one. We needed one.
Yeah. So as a child, my dad would make me read the newspaper, like the entire Toronto Star. And that was it.
It was impressive for a 3-year-old.
For a 4-year-old who didn't speak the language, immigrated from Portugal. Yeah, no, it was very, very impressive. No, I just always remembered stuff. Just had one of those memories, baseball cards. Like when I was young, was always remembering stats. And I think that's why I'm good in this particular industry, because I'm really, kind of an inside joke is that I know our agents' files better than they know it.
Yeah.
And
for years.
And it's kind of like, I've always told people, and I actually do believe this, it is in me to remember this stuff, but it's mostly because I actually care. I think there's a big factor. When you really care about it, it becomes, like a little factoid about my son would be replaced with a loan to value on somebody's house. Right? So it's just like you can only have so much information. I'm not Doogie Howser. I'm not anything. That just really dated me.
I'm like, anyway, who the hell is that?
It's Barney from How I Met Your Mother. It's important here. Like we have people's livelihoods, their houses. I own a home. I have a kid. I have a wife. It resonates, right? And always really has. And it's hard not to separate the thing. I don't know. It's really hard not to project your own situation onto our clients.
I agree. Right. And today on the program is Mark. Mark is senior team member in renewals. You started in renewals too. Like so you interviewed here in this building, and it was an impact interview for me because you're one of the few people who you turned around after the interview, you touched my arm in the hallway. Aw.
So nice.
And said, along the lines of, if I don't get the job, it was great to meet you, but what you're doing here is really exciting. And as an entrepreneur and someone who often at night wonders, am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? I was like, when you left, I was like, wow, this guy seems to get it. So walk us through, because when I say, this company's doing this, you're like, I used to work there.
Literally.
When I worked there, they did it this way. So what's your experience level, or how did you get into the entire industry?
Okay, so I'll try to make it as succinct as possible because there's literally like 9 different avenues to go down. But my dad knew somebody that worked at CIBC, and I needed a job when I started at U of T, and he got me a job as a teller. And I just started moving kind of up the ranks, even though I was working and going to school at the same time. Once I graduated, I had a job, which if you remember the job market in like 2003, 2004, not great. Like a lot of my friends were leaving university. They would go work at a Home Depot for a year and a half until they got something in an internship. Mm-hmm. So it was tough. So having a job, leaving university with CIBC, and then I moved to TD was huge. So I started making good money, and it got me in with a bank, which, as a son of an immigrant, that's a great job, right? Like I'm first generation here. My dad came here really, really young. I immigrated to Portugal, came back here. So just having a job was like huge. And then I got into mortgages through B2B, which is AGF Trust. And then I worked with Paradigm. So basically I just really started when the market kind of crashed, not the real estate market, Wall Street, 2008, Occupy. I didn't want to do investments anymore. Really liked the real estate side of it. My dad's an architect, so part of the family. And that was it. I did mortgages basically with Home Trust, Paradigm, a lot of our lenders. So I think I could bring, Nuborrow a little bit, Freedom at the time, a little bit of an inside edge, knowing what the lenders were looking for, how they operated. And I think that's kind of my value is just having that experience with them.
Yeah, no, I agree. You touched on, first generation, and I know the story, but I think it's worth sharing. You've had a unique high school experience by suddenly going back home, so to speak? This is your home, but going back to Portugal. What was that like?
It was, I'll be honest, the first year was probably the most scared I've ever been in my life. Because I went somewhere where I didn't really know anybody. I didn't really speak the language, and you really understand what people that come to Canada feel like when they don't speak.
Yeah, back up. What grade were you in, or when did you go?
So I was 12, and I started grade 8 there.
Wow.
Which is like a really, awkward.
It's a pivotal time.
It's a pivotal time. It's really awkward, and the schooling there is very advanced compared to what we have here. So it'd be almost the equivalent of you don't speak the language, but also you're now an honors program, and keep up if you can. So my dad did the best he could. He got me a tutor over the summer to kind of fast track learning the language. But learning, reading, writing, and then understanding physics in a different language are completely different things.
That's crazy.
And I was also a little kid, right? So I didn't really mature physically until I was probably 14 or 15. And in Portugal, and I've told Adam this before, they have no problem holding kids behind. So I was in grade 8 with 16, 17-year-olds. Like, these people were, close to procreating and driving bikes like Suzuki's, not 10 speeds, right? And they were smoking cigarettes and drinking beer, and I'm 12. Like, I look like a 12-year-old version of myself. I still look 12, and this is just me shorter. So for me, it was tough that first year or so. But I'll always say this much: they embraced me almost to the point of making sure I was taken care of. And here I find, and for whatever reason, Canada's its own place. We come from every part of the world, and we meet up here. And sometimes we don't always mesh as much. In Portugal, everybody's Portuguese. They saw me as another Portuguese kid, other than them asking me if I knew Bryan Adams or Celine Dion. Once those questions went out of the way, I was just like a little Portuguese kid. And they're like, we want to make sure this kid's taken care of. So they took care of me. They made sure I always, felt part of. I was never bullied. I was never ostracized. So yeah, it was a really unique experience. And I lived in a really small village there. It was right on the ocean. So it was really beautiful, but it was one of those things where you never really feel like you're part of their culture. You never really feel Canadian. You're kind of in the mix. You're kind of in between the two things. One of my lasting memories was watching the Toronto Blue Jays win the 1993 World Series. Joe Carter hits a home run, goes over the left field wall, and I'm watching it on Japanese television at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Wasn't it in 92?
92 was their first World Series when we beat the Atlanta Braves.
On October 24th. That was a Saturday.
Yeah, 1993 was Joe Carter, Mitch Williams.
Touch them all, Joe.
I thought I caught him on that one. I was I know this fact.
No. Because in 92, when we beat the Atlanta Braves, there was a bunt attempt by Otis Nixon for no reason.
Wait, you were watching it in Japanese?
Yeah. In Japanese, because
what is in your head?
NHK Tokyo was the only station that would show the baseball game. And it was really grainy. And I could just kind of make it out, even though they were talking in Japanese. So I could understand the Jokato home run. Like that came through, and I woke my dad up, and he was like, I got work the next day. But he's okay with it because the Jays won.
What grade? What grade? At least you didn't disappoint when I off the top said you are an encyclopedia. What grade did you come back?
I came back for grade 12. And I'm
also a pivotal time.
Yeah, and I'm old enough that there was still an OAC or grade 13, right? So at least I got the 12 and 13 to kind of immerse back. But it was always, the plan my dad had for me was always, you're gonna stay there until you figure out if that's your forever place or not. And the way he kind of proposed it to me was, when my parents came back, they gave me the option to stay. And I love my parents, but I'm an only child. As intimately as somebody can be an only child, I'm an only child. So from the time, and my dad will admit this, from the time I was 9, 10 years old, I would travel by myself. They would put me on flights. I'd go to Europe by myself, which horrifies my wife. My wife's horrified when she thinks of my 5-year-old son going on a plane by himself. And he's like, you used to do that? I'm like, yeah, I used to do that. So I'm an only child. I would have been okay on my own living there, but I just looked at it from the mindset of, am I going to stay there forever? If not, you definitely have to make a decision now, because you either go back and you immerse yourself back in that culture, or you stay here and immerse yourself in this culture, and they're very different. The entrepreneur doesn't really exist there. You're either a government employee, or you live off of the government, or that's it. Here in Canada, you can still, decide to open up a brokerage and be successful. Give a part of yourself. My dad went there as a successful entrepreneur here, and I wouldn't say what he did was failure. He got absorbed by the bureaucracy of their system there that doesn't let you succeed. He needed permits for things. He needed supply chain issues to be resolved, and their response was always, well, that's some other person's problem. So the bureaucracy just killed him there to the point that he said, you know what, I'm going to go back. And that was his decision.
Okay.
So for me, that's why I always thought to myself, if I want to succeed in life where I'm not reliant on other people, it's not going to happen here. You're always going to rely on somebody to make a decision for you. And that scared me. And I don't want that.
No, I'll get it. So you got a broad range of travel and bank and lender experience. So what brought you to, at that time, Freedom? What made you reach out to the job post? Why were you exploring getting, we call it corporate, right? Because we're still, even today, we're bigger, but we still run like a startup. There's no red tape here. If we need to make a decision, we make it.
Yeah.
So what was attractive about not just here, but like getting out of that system?
Well, I think with me, I've always been able to make decisions where I could be mobile as possible. I just never really wanted to get stuck anywhere. And you'll see it on my resume. Like I have really good references for everything. But I think to a certain extent, my shelf life in a lot of the corporations is going to be 2 to 4 years. Because once you get to a certain level there, you either become part of the culture there, and the culture that you can't really impact because it's so large.
Right.
That with this type of company size, you can fundamentally change things for the better, you'd hope, just because it's smaller and more agile and you can make a difference. So I can come to you and talk to you about something, and you might agree or disagree, but you'll at least consider it and then maybe modify what we're doing because of that. Your voice in a corporation just gets lost. So for me, that's one of the big aspects of it. And also was one of those things where I just figured, my wife was pregnant at the time. It was one of those things where I thought I had one significant time in my life that I could make a major move and try something completely different. Because once, and you know this in your situation especially, once the kids come into play, it's no longer about you making the decision. You have to think about, well, what's proximity to a school? How am I paying the bills? At that point, I had enough that I didn't necessarily need to concern myself with that. I could make that one last trump card and just say, this is the time to make the move. Right. And to be fair, I think me and you, as soon as we kind of met each other, there was a really good vibe that happened between the two of us. Because I think I came in and I tried to do this on purpose. I don't think I ever told you this, but the way I looked at it was I didn't know who you were at all, right? I didn't really research other than the Google reviews, right? But that doesn't really describe who you are.
No.
At all, right? So, and I don't want this to come off as a fluff piece, but the reality is that like you're, especially coming from a corporate environment where everything is a certain way and everybody kind of becomes a similar version of themselves, you got a bit of a Willy Wonka thing that happens when people meet you. You're just like
wonderful.
You do. You're just
I know that movie reference.
Yeah, she gets the reference, right? But that's
the Johnny Depp version, I hope.
I prefer the Gene Wilder, but whatever.
That one's scary.
I just prefer that version. But the way I just look at Adam is like you have a certain persona, right? You dress a certain way, right? And not that that dictates who you are, but it just shows that there's a certain charisma that you have, right? And we've discussed this before, so I hope I'm not giving any trade secrets away, but Adam has a big personality, right? And sometimes there's people that work with us that have the polar opposite personality, but you can get more out of them because you're willing to put yourself out there more. And I think